we are going to skip the interpretation, the simultaneous interpretation, but you can still ask your question in Kinyarwanda. Nashaka kubaza mbere yuko dutangira niba twakoresha icyongereza gusa, ariko ushobora kubaza ikibazo cyawe mu Kinyarwanda cyangwa mu Gifaransa cyangwa mu Cyongereza. Special Rapporteur yumva Igifaransa n'Icyongereza, ariko dufite interprète professionnel bashobora kudufasha no mu Kinyarwanda. Ushobora kubaza ikibazo cyawe mu Kinyarwanda, ariko ndagira ngo tubanze tumenye eske dukeneye ko biba simultané cyangwa se twakoresha icyongereza n'igifaransa gusa, hanyuma wabaza ikibazo cyawe mu Kinyarwanda tukaza kugisobanura. Cyane cyane ndi kureba abashuti zanjye, abavandimwe bacu bavuga Ikinyarwanda. Twabikora gutyo gusa cyangwa tukore tugendana. Mwese mushobora kumva Icyongereza? Hari utumva Icyongereza? Oui, bien sûr. Vous pouvez poser votre question en français et puis il va répondre également en français. All right. Okay. So we do one language, and then if there is any need to translate into Kinyarwanda, we will also do it. So you can ask your question in either way, in French, English, or Kinyarwanda. So we are starting. My name is Didier Habimana. I normally work for UN Economic Commission for Africa. But I'm stepping in as a moderator on behalf of the office of the UN Resident Coordinator. So the whole office is in the retreat. They couldn't make it. So I would like to welcome all of you, to those who are in Kigali attending this press conference with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Mr. Olivier de Schutter. And also I would like to welcome those online as well, those who are following this session via live streaming. I wanted to inform you that Mr. De Schutter and his team have been in Rwanda since 19th of May and have been visiting different districts in western and southern provinces, meeting with different individuals, communities, government officials, international organizations, representative non-government organizations, academics, and others. So Mr. De Schutter will today present us his preliminary report, preliminary findings on the state of the poverty in Rwanda and his recommendation to the government on what can be done to eradicate poverty. So the Special Rapporteur, normally all those that we call Special Rapporteurs in the UN are independent human rights experts. They are appointed by United Nations Human Rights. They are not UN staff. They do not receive any salary for their work. So they're individual, they serve in the individual capacity, and they are independent from any government or organization, including the United Nations. So any views or opinions presented are solely those of the author and do not necessarily represent those of the UN or human rights body of the UN. And the copies of the reports or the mission statement will be circulated and will also be available online in English, in French, and in Kinyarwanda on the Special Rapporteur's website. So following the presentation that is going to have, so we will open the floor for questions. Questions can be asked, like I said, in French, English, and also those who are following online, they can go to their YouTube chat box, and then they can also send their questions that Mr. De Schutter will be pleased to respond. So without further ado, Mr. De Schutter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Didier. Good morning to all. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Olivier de Schutter. I'm the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. And I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to the government of Rwanda for having invited me to visit the country and to provide an assessment of the achievements in the fight against poverty. It's important, I think, to recall that governments are not forced to cooperate with the UN human rights system. They do so voluntarily when they wish to express an openness towards the scrutiny that we engage in. And I am therefore particularly grateful that the government has allowed me to visit the country, meeting with a very large number of ministers, 11 ministers, and in addition to the Prime Minister, Edouard Guirente, whom I would like to thank for the very frank conversations we had. We are usually described as the eyes and ears of the international community. Usually human rights scrutiny happens in Geneva or New York, but we have a unique ability to travel to countries, to speak to people, including communities in very remote areas, local public officials, people at the front line of the fight against poverty. And it has been a privilege for me to be able to collect information by being present on the side of these people. I'd like to thank, of course, the UN country team for having facilitated the logistical part of the mission. I'd like to thank my team, François Denuy, my senior advisor, Farhan Siddiqui from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who've been providing excellent support. Let me now enter into the substance of what we have found. Rwanda has been making significant progress in combating poverty. The figures recently released on the living conditions in Rwanda by the National Institute of Statistics show that between 2017 and 2024, poverty was reduced from 39.8% of the population to 27.4%. That means that 1.5 million Rwandans have been rescued from poverty during this 7-year period. Extreme poverty figures have gone down also from 11.3% in 2017 to 5.4% in 2024. We have 700,000 Rwandans in extreme poverty, but nevertheless, the situation is improving. However, behind those figures that are encouraging, there are very important gaps that remain. In particular, there's an important gap between the urban and the rural areas. Poverty rates in rural areas are 31.6%, which is almost double what we have in urban areas. Extreme poverty is 6.4%. Now, what is also striking is that although Rwanda has gradually reduced inequality, inequalities remain quite high in cities. In Kigali and in other urban centers, inequality on a Gini coefficient that goes from 0, which is a completely equal society, to 1, which is a completely unequal society. A city such as Kigali scores 0.44, which is a high level of inequality. Inequality levels in rural areas are 0.26, which is much lower. And one way, therefore, to summarize the situation in Rwanda is to say that in rural areas, poverty is equally spread, whereas in cities, wealth is unequally shared. Multidimensional poverty, which is going beyond monetary income, has also decreased in recent years. It was at 57.5% in 2015. It now is at 48.8%. These are calculations from the UNDP and others, which means that if we take into account access to public services, housing, education, nutrition, healthcare, the situation there too is improving. I am in the country, however, at a time when it is facing hard choices. As you know, the debt of the country has increasing. It's now at 78.7% of the GDP. It's still moderate risk, but the government is now asked to reduce spending and to increase the mobilization of domestic resources if it wishes to keep public deficits under control. So the question is, what will it do? My message to the government that I expressed, I think, very clearly to Prime Minister Edouard Guirente is that this is a time when the government should invest in the people. Invest in healthcare, invest in education, invest in social protection, invest in creating good jobs. The tendency, however, or the signs are not particularly promising. Healthcare, for example, represented 10% of the public budgets in 2021, and today it is only 7% of the public budget that goes to healthcare. Social protection has seen its budgets decrease by 22% between 2023 and 2024, and a further 30% between 2024 and 2025, although Parliament is now examining the budget framework for 2025-2026, and I'm optimistic, having spoken to the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, Gertrude Casarva, that hard questions will be asked by Parliament about cutting down these expenses on social protection. Let me illustrate my concern for investing in people with perhaps 4 examples. I start with education. And I had a very good meeting with Minister Joseph Nzenzigimana on the future of education in the country. Rwanda has a young population. 58% of the population is younger than 40 years old, than 24 years old. And therefore, investing in education is key. However, I note that the rates of dropout are still high, particularly in secondary education. On average today, Rwandan children study 6.9 years. In other terms, the vast majority of them do not finish secondary school. In addition, and perhaps even more troubling, learning adjusted years of schooling are 3.9. In other terms, when they leave school, most children have the competences that you acquire in less than 4 years of schooling. In other terms, they do not have the skills required for them to succeed in adult life. Dropout rates have been going down slightly thanks to the school feeding programs that were made universal in 2021, but they do remain very high, and the repetition rates are very high, costing the education budget about 1/4 of the total. In addition, those numbers about school attendance do not say the whole story, because the quality of education is very low, explaining that Rwanda ranks on the 160th position on a total of 175 countries on the Human Capital Index of the World Bank. Teachers are often poorly trained. The classrooms at primary level are often overcrowded, despite 25,000 classrooms having been added in the period 2017-2024, and 64% of primary schools operate on a double shift system. In other terms, children are taught during the morning or the afternoon, but not during the full day, because there are not enough classrooms or enough available teachers. That affects especially low-income children for 2 reasons. First, because when you are raised in a low-income family, you have less access to pre-primary education, so you come to school less prepared, and your ability to learn is diminished. And secondly, because children in poor families have not been able, or are not able to join the private schools, which are the best in the country, although the upper 20% of the population, the highest quintile, have 34% of their children in private schools. In other terms, we have emerging a form of segregation in education between the rich and the poor that should be remedied by increasing investments in public schools and in government subsidized schools. The second example is healthcare. This is a success story in the country. The Mutuelle de Santé, the community-based health insurance, have a very high coverage of the population, with 87.9% of the population covered. That is extremely commendable. Some problems remain, however. The number of skilled health workers, nurses, doctors, midwives remains too low as a ratio of the population. And more troubling, almost half of the health budget is from external donors. And the support of external donors will be in the future much more unpredictable and may go down, which raises the question of where in the future money will be found to finance healthcare. This is a problem I've been discussing at length with Minister Sabin Nsanzimana, whom I met on this issue. The third example concerns food and agriculture. Food insecurity is persistent in the country. Although the figures have improved, we still have more than 17% of the population in food insecurity. In other terms, 17% of households are not certain to be able to eat enough every day. But more troubling, 75%, 3/4 of households cannot afford a healthy diet that is sufficiently diverse and nourishing. And the stunting rates are stubbornly high. 30% of children have development problems, have delayed development because they do not eat enough diverse diets, and they've not received the early or the feeding in their early years, especially in rural areas. So we need to invest more in agriculture. We need to invest more in supporting small-scale farmers, because that is where poverty is most prevalent. And we must do so by emphasizing the need not only to boost the calories produced or the yields, but by encouraging investments in diversified farming systems, by using mixed cropping schemes, allowing more diverse diets to be available to the population. The fourth example concerns social protection, which of course in my conversations with the government has been one major topic of discussion, and it was of course central to my dialogue with the Minister of Local Government, Patrice Muyenzi. Social protection relies on the Vision Umurenge program, the VUP program, implemented by Minalok, the Minister of Local Government, and that is a lifeline for 500,000 households in the country, approximately 1.7 million individuals. And here I would like to make two remarks. The first remark concerns the targeting of the support that people get. Obviously, in a country such as Rwanda, you cannot cover the whole population well, at least immediately, and therefore it is crucial to reach the right people. And the way the targeting operates under the VUP system is complex. Parasocial workers visit the families and fill in questionnaires to assess the needs. You then have the village chief, the Mudugudu, who draws up the lists, and these lists are then validated at the Tuesday community meetings, the Intoke Zabaturahe meetings, where the community basically assesses whether the choice was justified. I discussed with many communities how this works. I discussed with governors in the provinces of the south and the western province. I examined this in great detail, and I come back with the conviction that the targeting essentially works as I've described it, with maybe two provisos. One, some people, although this is marginal, told me that in order to be put on the list, they needed to provide some minor facilitation payments. bribes. In Kenya, Rwanda, ikisiriko, despite the very strong schemes that are put in place to prevent corruption in the country that essentially are functioning very well, and I will return to this point. The second proviso is that in these community meetings, not all people participate necessarily equally, and particularly the Batwa, although invited to these meetings, do not feel necessarily part of the community and may be missed as a result in these schemes. My second remark on the VUP programs is that the levels of protection provided are inadequate. People who cannot work because they are too old or because of a disability, they receive a cash transfer, the Ingoboka, that represents 7,500 francs per month. And it is also this sum that, under the nutrition-sensitive direct support component, women who are pregnant or who have a young child whom they are feeding until the second birthday, that is also the sum that they receive. That is insufficient to keep people out of poverty, and I very much hope that the government will consider not only maintaining this level of support, but increasing it in the future. Let me now turn to employment. The government faces three challenges here. It professes to create more jobs for young adults, and that is indeed extremely important because 28% of young adults are not in employment, education, or training. These are the NEETs, as they are known in international statistics. And because it's a fast-growing workforce, you need to create jobs. But jobs must be decent in order to protect people from poverty. And there are three challenges. One, the vast majority of the jobs, up to 82%, are informal jobs with limited protection as a result. Secondly, many people do not find jobs. Unemployment is 13.9% in the country. And thirdly, even if you have a work, if you have a job, it doesn't mean you are protected from poverty. More than 1 in 4 workers live in poverty. This is the rate of in-work poverty, 25.3%. So what can be done? I discussed this with Minister Christine Kuliki-Yinka, the Minister of Public Services and Labor, and I strongly recommend that we adopt a minimum wage for this country. That is actually something the Labor Code requires, but the Minister has not taken the initiative of adopting the ordinance or the decree that would protect workers from poverty wages. We could have a different minimum wage level for the rural and the urban areas, and the unions have proposed the figures. For the minimum wage to be a living wage, I think it's really important. Otherwise, employers will continue to compete on low wages, and that is simply not acceptable. In fact, the private sector itself would welcome an initiative on this issue. The second issue is how to ensure formalization and move beyond the high levels of informality. And here, as in other countries, we need a two-track approach. First, we need to protect informal workers from abuse and exploitation by ensuring that labor inspectors monitor the informal sector in particular, and by ensuring that informal workers have decent working conditions. And secondly, we need more positively to provide incentives to formalize. Businesses who register in Rwanda and formalize have a fiscal incentive to households. Gender-based violence is more important. And when there is an imbalance of power within the household, the man, the husband, does not contribute as much to the chores, does not contribute as much with his revenue to paying for the family expenses, does not take care of the children, and as a result, opportunities for women are diminished. This should be addressed. And I made three proposals. The first one is to invest more in everything that can relieve women from the burdens that they face. For example, the home-based component of the expanded public works scheme in the VUP programs could be further supported to give better access to early childhood education and care and relieve women from care work during the early years of the child. Strengthening the ability for early childhood development centers to deliver services. I was struck by the fact that the Auditeur Général, who every year presents Parliament and President with a report on the delivery of public services, noted that when he visited ECD centers, early childhood development centers in 2023, 92% of these centers could not deliver the full range of services that young children can be expected to receive because of lack of funding and lack of personnel. I very much hope his recommendations in this regard can be acted upon, also because this is the best way to reduce the high stunting rates in this country. My second proposal is that parental leaves should be equalized. Today, women have a maternal leave of 14 weeks when the paternal leave is only 7 days. That is problematic, and we need to send a signal that fathers also should take care of the baby, and this may mean increasing the parental leave, the paternal leave, to gradually achieve equality in this regard, to send that message very clearly. And my third proposal concerns the pay of women. The labor code provides that there should be equal pay for equal work. But given that there is a very strong professional segregation in the country, with women and men performing different jobs, working in different sectors, what we need is equal pay for work of equal value, which is not exactly the same thing, because it obliges the employer to justify differences in wages by comparing the value of jobs and not simply by checking whether they are identical jobs. My second transversal consideration, and this is what I will close with, concerns participation and accountability. In this country, there are many tools for participation of communities, from the high-level national dialogue that every December allows to hold accountable public officials, including the ministers and mayors and the president himself. The district level convenes the Joint Action Development Forum, which brings together many stakeholders at district level to set priorities. And at village level, I already mentioned the community meetings, the Inteko Zabaturage, that under the leadership of the village chiefs, the Mudugudus, allow the community to express concerns. Now, these are useful tools, and the country, in fact, has a range of mechanisms to ensure accountability and to ensure the adequate delivery of public services. I met with Madeleine Nirere, the ombudsperson for the country, working to address corruption and maladministration. I examined the work of the Auditor General, presenting his annual report to Parliament on the use of public funds. I know that officials sign Imihigo performance contracts so that their performance can be monitored. And all this is important. And the country can boast very sound governance in that respect. Local officials are held accountable. However, there is less room to question the major orientations of the government, as opposed to the quality of the delivery of public services. And there is little space for civil society, unions, to express critical views about the major choices that at the macro level government makes, and provide genuine feedback, including critical feedback. I think this could be improved. I like the slogan that the government professes to build its work on, Umuturage ku isonga, the citizen at the center. That is important, but that requires a government that is guided by the expectations and the feedback from the people. That requires a government that listens. That requires a government that accepts criticism and that does not discourage, but instead encourages criticism that can allow it to perform better. Let me close by thanking all those whom I met during this mission, by expressing again my gratitude to the government of Rwanda for having facilitated this, and by expressing my hope that I will be able to return to this country in a few years' time and to see that further progress has been achieved. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Discuter. We're going to have a round of 3 questions at the start, and then you just introduce yourself and then go straight to the point, asking your question. Reminding you also that the Special Rapporteur will conduct exclusive interviews also with certain media, after the press conference. So if you are booked to have the exclusive interview, probably we can let the space to others who don't have those privileges. But again, it's open for everyone. We'll get the questions from those that are following online and those that are in the room. So, vous pouvez poser vos questions en français ou en anglais. Ou en Kinyarwanda également. Voilà. Allez-y, André.
Mon nom c'est André Gakwaya. Je dirige l'agence rwandaise d'information. Votre travail est vaste et a touché aux principaux points de la gouvernance au Rwanda. Et à votre avis, est-ce que le Rwanda a amorcé et a mis en place une bonne politique pour atteindre une bonne croissance allant dans le sens du respect de la dignité humaine, du développement et du respect des droits de l'homme? Est-ce qu'à votre avis, si les mesures en place sont respectées et si les fonds sont utilisés avec efficience, estimez-vous que, et surtout que la corruption, à votre avis, j'espère que vous avez trouvé qu'elle est sérieusement combattue. Trouvez-vous que le pays peut s'avérer un bon exemple pour d'autres pays et même peut espérer atteindre la vision qu'il s'est assignée? Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur André. Une autre question, another question, or in Kinyarwanda, ikindi kibazo. The floor is open. Ego.
Thank you very much. By the names of Abel Moses Kwishimwe, I'm from Royal FM. So my question is, based on your preliminary findings, what specific gaps do you see in Rwanda's current social protection programs, and how can they be strengthened to better support those living in extreme poverty? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Royal FM.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel Nirenganya. I'm a journalist for the New Times. You commended Rwanda on its efforts to reduce poverty, including extreme poverty in the last 7 years, which resulted in lifting 1.5 million people out of poverty during that period under review. But you mentioned something about workers, and I want to get clarification on poverty among workers and why you proposed or suggested that the country should set up a minimum wage, which may maybe even include various rates depending on rural and urban workers or other factors. But how should the country set up such minimum wage, and why does it matter? And you can talk about even income inequalities or economic inequalities among urban and rural area dwellers, or inequality in general. What are the practices that can help address such income inequalities? Thank you.
Mr. Discuter.
Well, first of all, thank you for these questions. The role of the media, the role of journalists is extremely important in order to maintain a vibrant dialogue about the trajectory of the country and to ensure that we continue to make progress in improving living conditions of people in poverty. Monsieur André Nakwaya de l'Agence rwandaise d'information posait la question de savoir si le pays était sur la voie de réaliser ses ambitions, y compris l'ambition de sortir de la catégorie des pays les moins avancés en 2030, comme il est anticipé. Le progrès qui a été fait est important. Il est évidemment fondé sur des taux de croissance économique très impressionnants, de l'ordre de 7 à 8% au cours des 15 dernières années, ce qui est tout à fait remarquable, y compris en comparant aux autres pays de la région. Le fait de sortir du statut de pays moins avancé amènera cependant des nouveaux défis. D'abord parce que les opportunités d'exporter en bénéficiant de certaines préférences seront moins importantes. Donc le pays devra se développer en comptant moins sur les exportations, notamment vers les pays de l'OCDE. Et ensuite parce que les bailleurs de fonds internationaux seront peut-être moins généreux une fois que le Rwanda aura atteint le niveau d'un pays à revenu intermédiaire. Est-ce qu'il peut arriver à cette situation dans les années qui viennent? En tout cas, il progresse bien, mais je constate que les bénéfices de la croissance sont inégalement répartis. Et il y a aujourd'hui une grave lacune, si vous voulez, dans la trajectoire de développement du pays. C'est que la qualité de ce que les économistes appellent le capital humain laisse beaucoup à désirer. Lutter contre la malnutrition infantile, améliorer, c'est la priorité numéro 1, la qualité de l'enseignement et réduire les niveaux de déscolarisation pour que les enfants au Rwanda terminent leurs études secondaires avec un diplôme qui leur donne des compétences permettant de réussir sur le marché du travail. C'est tout à fait indispensable pour un pays qui veut lutter contre la pauvreté. Et en anticipant sur la première des deux questions du New Times, it is not a sustainable strategy for a country to build a comparative advantage by keeping its population in poverty. And maintaining low wages, if it is to achieve competitiveness in labor-intensive sectors, is a self-defeating strategy, because it's a strategy that will not allow most of the population to benefit from general progress. So I very much believe that setting a minimum wage at rates that have now started in Parliament on those on the new budgetary framework for the next year. Let me close by the second question coming from the New Times. I'm again very grateful for that question on urban-rural inequalities. I'm aware of the scale of the challenge. I'm aware that many efforts have been made to strengthen infrastructure in rural areas, feeding roads, connection to electricity grids, piped water, and of course the health outposts across the country. That is all very important. But small-scale farmers, depending on subsistence agriculture, face enormous challenges. Their access to markets is very weak. They have insufficient storage facilities, so they have to sell during harvest period when the prices are low, and they then have to buy in order to eat when the prices are high. They often receive a form of support from the government, subsidized fertilizers, improved varieties of seeds, that may create a dependency and will lead them to adopt monocropping schemes that will be damaging soil health and not allowing a diversity of diets. And I think we could improve the kind of support that they benefit from, because that is where poverty is the most important. 4 out of 5 people in poverty in the country live in rural areas. So if we want to really make further progress in reducing poverty, we should invest in that sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone for attending this press conference. And also I would like to thank those who are online for exactly also participating to this press conference. I think it's very important that you come. The media is a force, and the Special Rapporteur has already said it, that you're a strong ally in terms of everything that he's doing. So the conversation continues, and should you want again to engage, you can check on the social media platforms, as well as the website of the Special Rapporteur. And I wanted also to thank you very much for allowing the journalists to have this time of interaction. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Murakoze cyane. Have a good weekend.